You need to always remember one thing. You are a guest in my house and on this planet. Just because everything seems familiar to you doesn't mean you belong here. You need to stop abusing my hospitality.
What did I do? What are you talking about?
Don't pretend to be naive. You know very well what you did. You kept camera on last time while we were reading. You edited and uploaded the Darwin video without showing me. You showed me in poor light in that video.
I think light was quite good. What was wrong with the light?
Stop it. You know what I mean. You showed me as a lazy and poor reader.
I showed reality.
Stop undermining me. You are not editing and uploading any more videos.
Okay.
Hi, I'm a Homo sapien from planet Earth. I call myself Alpha.
And I'm a Homo sapien from parallel Earth, and he calls me Beta.
So today we are talking about Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, and in today's video we'd be quoting plentiful from the book, first because it's brilliant writing, and secondly the subject matter is so varied that it would be hard for us to explain everything without constant referencing, so kindly bear with us. First impression. Writer Yuval Noah Harari is very funny, has a very sophisticated sense of humor. I like his irreverence for our cherished human institutions and his scoffing off at fallacious human ideologies. I like all of it.
You would, wouldn't you? You are an institution-hating anarchist, aren't you?
Tone of your voice suggests you haven't enjoyed the book as much as I did.
Oh, I enjoyed the book as much as you did. I just have different opinions than the writer. As you said, he makes fun of our institutions and ideologies. That's okay with me, but he also mocks human virtues that I hold dear to my heart.
I think you are just perturbed because he was slightly critical of Buddhism. So to our viewers, Buddha is his personal hero.
Yeah.
The what do you call it, tagline of and the logo has Buddha as the last phase of human progress.
Yeah.
He designed that logo, and the tagline, think, evolve, empathize, be enlightened, he wrote it.
I am not perturbed. Writer was critical of Buddhism, and rightly so. It has turned into just another dogmatic religion. The writer was not critical of Buddha. So to our viewers, as he said, Buddha is my personal hero, and Buddha happened on my planet as well as he happened on yours. I think he was the first rational Homo sapien who thought about human suffering and came up with the answer. Craving mind is the cause of suffering, and contemplative meditation, calming your mind through contemplative meditation, is the solution. So, cognitive revolution. Ever since life began on Earth, there have been several species of the genus Homo appeared on the Earth, but today only us, Homo sapiens, survive. And first few pages of this book tell us why this is so. Our ancestors possibly outsmarted the other species of genus Homo. Writer posits we survived because of our cognitive revolution, meaning our ancestors were smarter than other species. Quote, if the Neanderthals, Denisovans and other human species didn't merge with sapiens, why did they vanish? One possibility is that Homo sapiens drove them to extinction. Imagine a sapiens band reaching a Balkan valley where Neanderthals had lived for hundreds of thousands of years. The newcomers began to hunt the deer and gather the nuts and berries that were the Neanderthals' traditional staples. Sapiens were more proficient hunters and gatherers thanks to better technology and superior social skills, so they multiplied and spread. The less resourceful Neanderthals found it increasingly difficult to feed themselves. Their population dwindled and they slowly died out, except perhaps for one or two members who joined their sapiens neighbors. Unquote. Talking about Neanderthals and Denisovans, this is the funny bit. This is why
these lines why I like this book. So, quote, imagine how things might have turned out had the Neanderthals or Denisovans survived alongside Homo sapiens. What kind of cultures, societies, and political structures would have emerged in a world where several different human species coexisted? How, for example, would religious faiths have unfolded? Would the book of Genesis have declared that Neanderthals descend from Adam and Eve? Would Jesus have died for the sins of the Denisovans? And would the Quran have reserved seats in heaven for all righteous humans, whatever their species? Would Neanderthals have been able to serve in the Roman legions or in the sprawling bureaucracy of Imperial China? Would the American Declaration of Independence hold as a self-evident truth that all members of the genus Homo are created equal? Would Karl Marx have urged workers of all species to unite? Unquote. Throughout our history books, it's been promoted that ever since Homo sapiens have started farming and domesticating animals, we are better off than previously when we were hunter-gatherers, when we hunted animals and gathered fruits and nuts. But writer contradicts this. He says it's the biggest fraud in history. So what exactly he says? He says, quote, scholars once proclaimed that the agricultural revolution was a great leap forward for humanity. They told a tale of progress fueled by a human brain power. Evolution gradually produced ever more intelligent people. Eventually, people were so smart that they were able to decipher nature's secrets, enabling them to tame sheep and cultivate wheat. As soon as this happened, they cheerfully abandoned the grueling, dangerous, and often Spartan life of hunter-gatherers, settling down to enjoy the pleasant, satiated life of farmers. That tale is a fantasy. There is no evidence that people became more intelligent with time. Foragers knew the secrets of nature long before the agricultural revolution, since their survival depended on an intimate knowledge of the animals they hunted and the plants they gathered. Rather than heralding a new era of easy living, the agricultural revolution left farmers with lives generally more difficult and less satisfying than those of foragers. Hunter-gatherers spent their time in more stimulating and varied ways, and were less in danger of starvation and disease. The agricultural revolution certainly enlarged the sum total of food at the disposal of humankind, but the extra food did not translate into a better diet or more leisure. Rather, it translated into population explosions and pampered elites. The average farmer worked harder than the average forager and got a worse diet in return. The agricultural revolution was history's biggest fraud. Unquote. Yeah, I have a couple of notes here, not quotations, notes that I have taken down. Through agriculture came permanent settlements. We ceased to be wanderers and prefer to settle at one place, taking care to grow the grass that we eat, that is wheat. Writer argues we did not domesticate wheat, rather this grass domesticated us. It needed constant attention from us for its growth. In return, it provided us plentiful to eat and sustain many progenies. Homo sapiens' body was not designed to do farming, but we adapted to this new way of living just because it provided means for sustenance. As agricultural societies grew everywhere, complex cultures were formed, and so were codes of conduct to live harmoniously in collective group. One such code was Code of Hammurabi. Hammurabi was the king of Babylon, world's largest city, biggest city in 1776 BC. And in his code, he mentioned the kinds of crimes and accordingly what would be the punishments for those crimes. This code was hierarchical. Society was already divided between superior, commoner, and slaves. I'd like to add something regarding Code of Hammurabi. Writer likens this code to American founding document and says that both are equally fallacious in their claims of justice. So, quote, like Hammurabi's code, the American founding document promises that if humans act according to its sacred principles, millions of them would be able to cooperate effectively, living safely and peacefully in a just and prosperous society. Like the Code of Hammurabi, the American Declaration of Independence was just a document of its time and place. It was accepted by future generations as well. For more than 200 years, American school children have been copying and learning it by heart. The two texts
present us with an obvious dilemma. Both the Code of Hammurabi and the American Declaration of Independence claim to outline universal and eternal principles of justice. But according to the Americans, all people are equal, whereas according to the Babylonians, people are decidedly unequal. The Americans would of course say that they are right and that Hammurabi is wrong. Hammurabi naturally would retort that he is right and that Americans are wrong. In fact, they are both wrong. Hammurabi and the American founding fathers alike imagined a reality governed by universal and immutable principles of justice, such as equality and or hierarchy. Yet the only place where such universal principles exist is in the fertile imagination of sapiens, and in the myths they invent and tell one another. These principles have no objective validity. Unquote. The more I read this book, the more I liked it. Be careful, you are teetering towards nihilism. I get it, you hate human institutions, human virtues. Then what exactly do you stand for? What virtues do you aspire? No virtues. I aspire for no virtues. As this writer says, virtues exist only in the fertile imagination of sapiens. I personally believe life is a tale in paradoxes. Life is a tale told in paradoxes. Just live it. Don't pretend you found some grand moral in that tale, in that fable. Very passive way of living, don't you think? Passive? I'd say liberating. Liberating from what? Liberating from the burden of pretending to aspire for some grand human virtue that exists only in the minds of collective humans and become burdensome for a thinking individual. Answer me honestly, in last 24 hours, what was your happiest moment? I think playing with Roy made me happy, genuinely happy. You just called yourself a thinking individual, and yet your happiest moment is not to think some existential question, but to play with a dog. Paradox, isn't it? It's not a paradox, you idiot. You just want to sound smart saying it's a paradox. Obvious question here is what brought humans together and what kept them together in agricultural revolution? Answer is imagined order. And what is an imagined order? Quote, despite the lack of such biological instincts during the foraging era, hundreds of strangers were able to cooperate thanks to their shared myths. However, this cooperation was loose and limited. Every sapiens band continued to run its life independently and to provide for most of its own needs. An archaic sociologist living 20,000 years ago, who had no knowledge of events following the agricultural revolution, might well have concluded that mythology had a fairly limited scope. Stories about ancestral spirits and tribal totems were strong enough to enable 500 people to trade seashells, celebrate the odd festivals, and join forces to wipe out a Neanderthal band, but no more than that. Mythology, the ancient sociologist would have thought, could not possibly enable millions of strangers to cooperate on a daily basis. But that turned out to be wrong. Myths, it transpired, are stronger than anyone could have imagined. When the agricultural revolution opened opportunities for the creation of crowded cities and mighty empires, people invented stories about great gods, motherlands, and joint stock companies to provide the needed social links. While human evolution was crawling at its usual snail's pace, the human imagination was building astounding networks of mass cooperation, unlike any other ever seen on Earth. Unquote. So that answers the question, what is an imagined order? In the past, myths and gods were the imagined order that kept societies together, just like today. Today's idea of human rights is merely an idea in our collective imagination. Now, I'm going to read something. You might not like this. Quote, it is easy to accept that Hammurabi's code was a myth, but we do not want to hear that human rights are also a myth. If people realize that human rights exist only in the imagination, isn't there a danger that our society will collapse? Voltaire said about God that there is no God, but don't tell that to my servant, lest he murder me at night. Hammurabi would have said the same about his principles of hierarchy, and Thomas Jefferson about human rights. Homo sapiens has no natural rights. just as spiders, hyenas, and chimpanzees have no natural rights. But don't tell that to our servants, lest they murder us at night. End quote. Reading this book made me really happy. Quote, just such fears are well justified. Natural order is a stable order. There is no chance that gravity will cease to function tomorrow, even if people stop believing in it. In contrast, an imagined order is always in danger of collapse because it depends upon myths, and myths vanish once people stop believing in them. In order to safeguard an imagined order, continuous and strenuous effort are imperative. Some of these efforts take the shape of violence and coercion. Armies, police forces, courts, and prisons are ceaselessly at work, forcing people to act in accordance with the imagined order. If an ancient Babylonian blinded his neighbor, some violence was usually necessary in order to enforce the law of an eye for an eye. When in 1860, a majority of American citizens concluded that African slaves are human beings and must therefore enjoy the rights of liberty, it took a bloody civil war to make the southern states acquiesce. Unquote. I believe you have nothing to add in here. No, because you are a believer and follower of imagined order. Unification of humankind. After agricultural revolution, human collectives formed complex cultures, and until last few decades, prominent belief was that every culture is authentic and evolved without external influences. But writer says that's not correct. Quote, during the first half of 20th century, scholars thought that every culture was complete and harmonious, possessing an unchanging essence that defined it for all time. Each human group had its own worldview and system of social, legal, and political arrangements that ran as smoothly as the planets going around the sun. In this view, cultures left to their own devices did not change. They just kept going at the same pace and in the same direction. Only a force applied from outside could change them. Anthropologists, historians, and politicians thus refer to Samoan culture as Tasmanian culture, as if the same beliefs, norms, and values had characterized Samoans and Tasmanians from time immemorial. Today, most scholars of culture have concluded that the opposite is true. Every culture has its typical beliefs, norms, and values, but these are in constant flux. The culture may transform itself in response to changes in its environment or through interaction with neighboring cultures, but cultures also undergo transitions due to their own internal dynamics. Even a completely isolated culture existing in an ecologically stable environment cannot avoid change. Like the laws of physics, which are free of inconsistencies, every man-made order is packed with internal contradictions. Cultures are constantly trying to reconcile these contradictions, and this process fuels change. Unquote. Furthermore, explaining how there is no such thing as authentic culture, writer gives an example of globalization of humans through ethnic cuisine. Quote, in an Italian restaurant, we expect to find spaghetti in tomato sauce. In Polish and Irish restaurants, lots of potatoes. In an Argentinian restaurant, we can choose between dozens of kinds of beef steaks. In an Indian restaurant, hot chilies are incorporated into just about everything. And the highlight at any Swiss cafe is thick hot chocolate under an alp of whipped cream. But none of these foods is native to those nations. Tomatoes, chili peppers, and cocoa are all Mexican in origin. They reached Europe and Asia only after the Spaniards conquered Mexico. Julius Caesar and Dante Alighieri never twirled tomato-drenched spaghetti on their forks. Even forks hadn't been invented yet. William Tell never tasted chocolate, and Buddha never spiced up his food with chili. Potatoes reached Poland and Ireland no more than 400 years ago. The only steak you could obtain in Argentina in 1492 was from a llama. That's unquote. That's an apt summary of how globalization happened. Next obvious thing when we started living together was exchange of goods and services. So barter system came into existence, but pretty soon barter system became inconvenient. How? Imagine a village of apple growing farmers. All farmers have
nothing but apples to offer in return of, suppose, a shoemaker. He makes shoes for an entire village, and how many apples can he or his family eat for exchange of shoes that he makes for an entire village? Besides, if shoemaker wants divorce from his wife, he needs to pay a lawyer, and how many shoes or apples can he offer to lawyer before lawyer says enough? So that was the problem with the barter system. Hence a brilliant idea was invented, and that idea was money. Quote, money was created many times in many places. Its development required no technological breakthroughs. It was a purely mental revolution. It involved the creation of a new intersubjective reality that exists solely in people's shared imagination. Money is not coins and banknotes. Money is anything that people are willing to use in order to represent systematically the value of other things for the purpose of exchanging goods and services. Money enabled people to compare quickly and easily the value of different commodities such as apples, shoes, and divorces, to easily exchange one thing for another, and to store wealth conveniently. There have been many types of money. The most familiar is the coin, which is a standardized piece of printed metal. Yet money existed long before the invention of coinage, and cultures have prospered using other things as currency, such as shells, cattle, skins, salt, grain, beads, cloth, and promissory notes. Cowrie shells were used as money for about 4,000 years all over Africa, South Asia, East Asia, and Oceania. Taxes could still be paid in cowrie shells in British Uganda in the early 20th century. Unquote. But how does money work? What is the basis for this system? And the answer is trust. Quote, trust is the raw material from which all types of money are minted. When a wealthy farmer sold his possessions for a sack of cowrie shells and traveled with them to another province, he trusted that upon reaching his destination, other people would be willing to sell him rice, houses, and fields in exchange for the shells. Money is accordingly a system of mutual trust, and not just any system of mutual trust. Money is the most universal and most efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. Unquote. Which is true even today. Furthermore, quote, the fact that another person believes in cowrie shells or dollars or electronic data is enough to strengthen our own belief in them, even if that person is otherwise hated, despised, or ridiculed by us. Christians and Muslims who could not agree on religious beliefs could nevertheless agree on a monetary belief, because whereas religion asks us to believe in something, money asks us to believe that other people believe in something. Unquote. Next obvious stage of human history after agriculture and money is empire formation. So what is an empire? Quote, an empire is defined solely by its cultural diversity and flexible borders rather than by its origins, its form of government, its territorial extent, or the size of its population. An empire did not emerge from a military conquest. The Athenian Empire began its life as a voluntary league, and the Habsburg Empire was born in wedlock, cobbled together by a string of shrewd marriage alliances. Nor must an empire be ruled by an autocratic emperor. The British Empire, the largest empire in history, was ruled by a democracy. Other democratic, or at least republican empires have been included: the modern Dutch, French, Belgian, and American empires, as well as the pre-modern empires of Novgorod, Rome, Carthage, and Athens. Size too does not really matter. Empires can be puny. The Athenian Empire at its zenith was much smaller in size and population than today's Greece. The Aztec Empire was smaller than today's Mexico. Both were nevertheless empires, whereas modern Greece and modern Mexico are not, because the former gradually subdued dozens and even hundreds of different polities, while the latter have not. Athens lorded it over more than 100 formerly independent city-states, whereas the Aztec Empire, if we can trust its taxation records, ruled 371 different tribes and peoples. Unquote. Here is more elaboration on empires. A quote, the truth is that empire has been the world's most common form of political organization for the last 2500 years. Most humans during this 2.5 millennia have lived in empires. Empire is also
a very stable form of government. Most empires have found it alarmingly easy to put down rebellions. In general, they have been toppled only by external invasion or by a split within the ruling elite. Conversely, conquered peoples don't have a very good record of freeing themselves from their imperial overlords. Most have remained subjugated for hundreds of years. Typically, they have been slowly digested by the conquering empire until their distinct cultures fizzle out." Unquote.
Religion. Now, here's a subject we believe we can discuss between us for hours, but we'll reserve that idle chat, for some other time. For now, we'll just quote few lines from the book. Quote, "Today, religion is often considered a source of discrimination, disagreement, and disunion. Yet, in fact, religion has been the third great unifier of humankind alongside money and empires. Since all social orders and hierarchies are imagined, they are all fragile, and the larger the society, the more fragile it is. The crucial historical role of religion has been to give superhuman legitimacy to these fragile structures." Unquote.
Yeah, furthermore, quote, "The best known religions of history, such as Islam and Buddhism, are universal and missionary. Consequently, people tend to believe that all religions are like them. In fact, the majority of ancient religions were local and exclusive. Their followers believed in local deities and spirits and had no interest in converting the entire human race. As far as we know, universal and missionary religions began to appear only in the first millennium BC. Their emergence was one of the most important revolutions in history and made a vital contribution to the unification of humankind, much like the emergence of universal empires and universal money." Unquote. So, along with the previous two unifiers that we talked about, empire and money, religion was the third unifier of humans according to this book. Furthermore, there is an explanation about the idea of God and as to how a monotheist and polytheist religions evolved over time. Humanism. Quote, "Theist religions focus on the worship of gods. Humanist religions worship humanity, or more correctly, Homo sapiens. Humanism is the belief that Homo sapiens has a unique and sacred nature, which is fundamentally different from the nature of all other animals and of all other phenomena. Humanists believe that the unique nature of Homo sapiens is the most important thing in the world, and it determines the meaning of everything that happens in the universe. The supreme God is the God of Homo sapiens. The rest of the world and all other beings exist solely for the benefit of these species." Unquote.
According to this book, a scientific revolution happened in Europe because they were ready to accept their ignorance and were ready to explore beyond their borders, and hence their scientific expeditions funded by the monarchs were also the expeditions to expand their empires.
Yes, the book dwells on how science and empire formation went hand in hand and how that ended up European monarchs colonizing the entire planet.
Quote, "The scientific revolution has not been a revolution of knowledge. It has been, above all, a revolution of ignorance. The great discovery that launched the scientific revolution was the discovery that humans do not know the answers to their most important questions. Pre-modern traditions of knowledge such as Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, and Confucianism asserted that everything that is important to know about the world was already known. The great gods, or the one almighty God, or the wise people of the past possessed all-encompassing wisdom, which they revealed to us in scriptures and oral traditions. Ordinary mortals gained knowledge by delving into these ancient texts and traditions and understanding them properly. It was inconceivable that the Bible, the Quran, or the Vedas were missing out on crucial secrets of the universe, a secret that might yet be discovered by flesh and blood creatures." Unquote.
Yeah, furthermore, quote, "Modern day science is a unique tradition of knowledge inasmuch as it openly admits collective ignorance regarding the most important questions. Darwin never argued that he was the seal of the biologist and that he had solved the riddle of life once and for all. After centuries of extensive scientific research, biologists admit that they still don't have any good explanation for how brains produce consciousness. Physicists admit that they don't know what caused the Big Bang or how to reconcile quantum mechanics with the theory of general relativity. In other cases, competing scientific theories are vociferously debated on the basis of constantly emerging new evidence. As prime example is the debate about how best to run the economy. Though individual economists may claim that their method is the best, orthodoxy changes with every financial crisis and stock exchange bubble, and it is generally accepted that the final word on economics is yet to be said. Unquote.
Capitalism. Quote, money has been essential both for building empires and for promoting science, but is money the ultimate goal of these undertakings, or perhaps just a dangerous necessity? Is it not easy to grasp the true role of economics in modern history? It is not easy to grasp the role of economics in modern history. Whole volumes have been written about how money founded states and ruined them, opened new horizons and enslaved millions, moved the wheels of industry and drove hundreds of species into extinction. Yet to understand modern economic history, you really need to understand just a single word. The word is growth. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, the modern economy has been growing like a hormone-soused teenager. It eats up everything it can find and puts on inches faster than you can count. Unquote. This book turns a little bleak here on, talking about capitalism and the expansion and how our hunger for growth affects the animals. It was painful to read, at least to me, what we do to animals in the name of industrial agriculture, so I will not go into details.
Yeah, it is indeed painful to read those chapters, but as the book comes to an end, it asks a philosophical question. Under capitalist creed, what exactly is human happiness and how to measure happiness of people? Quote, the last 500 years have witnessed a breathtaking series of revolutions. The earth has been united into a single ecological and historical sphere. The economy has grown exponentially, and humankind today enjoys the kind of wealth that used to be the stuff of fairy tales. Science and the Industrial Revolution have given humankind superhuman powers and practically limitless energy. The social order has been completely transformed, as have politics, daily life, and human psychology. But are we happier? Did the wealth humankind accumulated over the last 5 centuries translate into newfound contentment? Did the discovery of inexhaustible energy sources open before us inexhaustible stores of bliss? Going further back, have the 70 or so turbulent millennia since the cognitive revolution made the world a better place to live? Was the late Neil Armstrong, whose footprint remains intact on the windless moon, happier than the nameless hunter-gatherer who 30,000 years ago left her handprint on a wall in Showay Cave? If not, what was the point of developing agriculture, cities, writing, coinage, empires, science, and industry? Unquote.
I've just got last few lines, an end note from me. It's not a quotation from the book, it's a note that I have written. Book ends with a cautionary note that we might be turning too smart for our own good. With new scientific research in the fields of medicine and genetics, we are taking over nature's work. We are modifying and designing new forms of life with our intelligence. We are already merging with machines that we have created to serve us, and we might not remain Homo sapiens for too long. We have been replacing our old and dysfunctional organs with new ones. There's expanding lifespan, that's a good thing as far as life is concerned. But the book mentions Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as a cautionary tale, and that we might create some cyborg and grow to depend upon it so much that we might lose the essence of being Homo sapien. The word sapiens means wise, and that's the essence of our species: to be wise, to carry wisdom, to seek wisdom, to be aware and conscientious. A writer warns that we might be losing that essence to the machines that we have created. Being a historian, the writer mentions different eras: 70,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. And I know life back then was pretty slow. Life on earth was pretty slow, but still it escapes my imagination. I cannot imagine that era. No matter how much I read about that, I cannot conjure up the picture of that era. I find myself incapable of imagining and understanding that. So while reading the book, I had these wild fantasies of becoming a time traveler, and with the consciousness that I possess today, go and witness all that with my own eyes. Why? Because the body that I inhabit today, this Homo sapien body, was designed and engineered over that many eras. The mind, my inner being, my innate abilities, my instincts, all were shaped throughout that time. And I want to go back and witness that so that I can witness my own formation, to understand myself better, my selfhood better. As they say, know thyself.
Goosebumps. Very profound indeed.
Thank you. Any last words?
I had, but what you just said was far too profound. If I say something, it will sound far too feeble. So just give me a few moments to relish that thought of yours. What a hypocrite fellow. Earlier he pompously claimed he aspires for no virtues, and yet now he says, know thyself. Doesn't he realize self-inquiry is the highest human virtue?
Since he has been very congenial in today's talk, and I do believe that no book is good or bad and every book has its own merit, I relent to his choice. That is Kama Sutra by Vatsyayan. But after that, it would be my choice, and I choose the same writer, Yuval Noah Harari, and his sequel to Sapiens, Homo. It is a continuation of his thoughts. He talks about future of humanity in that book, and I very much look forward to reading that book after Kama Sutra. So that's all for now. Bye.